Hello and welcome to Take Two, the programme that takes a second look at the big issues. I'm Ian Henshall. Today we have a report from Bob Kidman on the drone attacks, which seem to be giving Al-Qaeda the biggest boost since US-UK invaded Iraq, and what we can do about even more pervasive surveillance. Tinfoil hats may be making a comeback, but not in the way we knew them. After that, Roy Hunter looks at Scottish independence. It might not have the implications people are expecting. But first, here are some news reports. Amazon links with the CIA. It seems they weren't joking when Amazon announced that they were planning to produce an army of drones, but the goal may be a little bit more than just delivering Christmas presents. Amazon founder and CEO Bob Bezos is a busy guy. As well as taking over the Washington Post, he has ambitious plans to link Amazon up with the CIA. Amazon, which minimises its own tax liabilities, has no problem overtaking some $600 million in public money from the CIA. In fact, they're proud of it. Last month, Amazon issued a statement saying, "We look forward to a successful relationship with the CIA." The US Roots Action campaign takes on the topics that better-known groups like Avaz won't touch. They say, Bezos is personally and publicly touting Amazon Web Services while Amazon strives for a successful relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency. Readers of the Washington Post will keep seeing articles about that agency. They're calling on the Post to declare its conflict of interest, that its owner and the CIA have got lots in common. They should do that. They say they'll do that. Will they? Roots Action point out that Amazon already has a history of supporting Washington, even if it means throwing their customers to the dogs. At the height of public interest in what WikiLeaks was publishing, readers were unable to access the website because it was booted from Amazon's web hosting service, AWS. Doubt service over Ukraine uprising. Take a look at this picture. If it's not a fake, it shows how closely the various Orange Revolution type events are linked. On the right you have leaflets handed out to protesters in the Ukraine. On the left are leaflets handed out to protesters who successfully overthrew Egypt's President Mubarak. Credit to Wayne Masden, legendary investigative journalist, for pointing this out on the dissident website VoltaireNet. How can we tell if a revolution is genuine or bought and paid for by NATO powers? Masden hints at a simple test. If the NATO media are in favour, with wall-to-wall coverage and shocking allegations of human rights abuses, then the chances are the revolution is an approved one. Experience suggests that it will leave the country with more inequality, a central bank controlled indirectly by the 1%, and foreign military bases threatening its neighbours. Later, when it's too late to reverse, it might even turn out that the allegations were made up. The story that won't go away. You know there's something odd going on when Rupert Murdoch's New York Post attacks the official story of the 9/11 attacks. A recent detailed investigation by the paper confirms what 9/11 skeptics have long known. The attacks were not carried out by a crowd of Al-Qaeda fanatics acting alone. In Washington, pressure is increasing on the CIA to agree to the release of documents showing that Saudis at the highest level were intimately involved with those who would later be accused of hijacking planes and flying them into buildings which collapsed even though they were designed to resist plane impacts and Atlantic storms. That's the official story. I have an interest to declare as author of 9/11 and New Evidence. I concluded that the official story was impossible, and the most likely explanation for the impossible success of the alleged hijackers was that the conspiracy was masterminded by a rogue network with its fingers in the CIA, the FBI, Saudi intelligence, Mossad and Pakistan's ISI, and quite possibly led by Dick Cheney, who put himself in charge of counter-terror exercises in the months before 9/11. We know that there was a Pentagon anti-hijack exercise running at the same time as the supposedly real 9/11 hijackings, and that Washington has managed to keep such a tight lid on this that even now most 9/11 skeptics are unaware of it. So why blame the Saudis, and why now? We can only speculate, but as we discussed in a previous programme, Saudi Arabia is of far less strategic importance than it used to be to the NATO powers. The Saudi hierarchy is conveniently impenetrable, feudal, above the law, totally unaccountable, and a long way from Washington, everything needed for a useful fall guy. There's another problem with the blame the Saudis line. They had very little to gain from 9/11, so it does not pass the time-honoured test of getting to the bottom of conspiracies. Who benefited? We all know who benefited. As Benjamin Netanyahu said the day after 9/11, 9/11 was good for Israel. Promoted from a pariah to a valued terrorism consultant across the planet. The CIA's budget and powers were transformed overnight. The Washington neocons got what they had set out to achieve, the further militarization of the US and the invasion of Iraq. Maybe it is time to set up a grand jury a bit nearer Washington than Riyadh. They could start by asking the CIA why FBI investigations in 3 states, any one of which would probably have aborted the 9/11 attacks, were frozen on their orders. Well, that's it for the news reports, the short news reports, and now we're going to look at drones, and you might get a few surprises. Have you ever wondered why there are so many Al-Qaeda operatives involved in conflicts now all over the Middle East, not just Iraq? Is it possible this is linked to a 5-year-long escalation of US and NATO drone killings? Bob Kidman has been looking at the relationship between drone attacks and the terrorist army now bringing disaster to Syria, and back at home, what countermeasures we can take. Rob, you've been looking into this, yeah?
Yes, I have, yes. Unmanned aerial vehicles, or drones as they are more commonly called, have been around since 1849, so they are not a new thing, and have been used to varying degrees and successes in most wars since then. Technology finally caught up under the Bush administration in 2004, when they started to be used in Pakistan, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan and Somalia. Under Obama, however, drone strikes have gone from being used on an average of once every 40 days to one every 4 days. December has so far tragically seen 3 drone strikes in Yemen and Pakistan. 52 people were allegedly killed in Yemen's capital on the 6th. 3 people were bombed in a car attack on the 9th, and a further 15 people died in a wedding convoy on the 12th. Reuters have cited sources saying that the wedding convoy bombing was a mistake and that the intended target was missed. Many top analysts believe drone strikes have created the terrorists we see today, who fight the proxy wars across the Middle East. Approximately 150,000 were brought to arms more recently during this year's violent escalations in Syria. One drone strike is said to create up to 60 terrorists, depending on who you speak to. Since 2004, drone strikes have been linked to the innocent killing of tribal men, women and children in places like Yemen and Pakistan. This type of warfare, which deals with preemptive strikes, has created a cycle of terror which, by design or not, provides the much needed cannon fodder in order to perpetuate a never-ending war.
So they deal primarily with preemptive strikes, do they? Am I right in saying you don't even have to commit a crime to be a suspected terrorist and therefore a target? Even if that's legal? Even if it's legal what you're doing? Is that legal?
Well, human rights groups say no, and so do the governments and populations of the countries which it affects. You have to look at this in context and think how you would feel if your neighbours or families were blown up by an oppressive foreign power. Who are the real terrorists here? The only people who want the attacks to continue in these countries appear to be the local Al-Qaeda recruitment officers, who in fact have never had it so good. Directly or indirectly, the news of drone attacks is the prime piece of propaganda Al-Qaeda recruiters are now using.
Doesn't this fly completely in the face of the whole idea of the war on terror?
Yes, completely.
So what are the stats here? I mean, you're mentioning these figures. Are they reliable?
Well, several sources estimate the death toll from drone strikes to be over 3,000 people in Pakistan alone. Less than 2% of these are named terrorist leaders. The mainstream media quote anywhere up to 900 casualties. The answer is we don't really know the true figure. Figures from all sides can be argued as being unreliable and show little consistency. This is in part due to the US having a non-disclosure policy and refusing to talk about drone missions. Trying to get to the bottom of this anomaly is Lucy Kavanagh from Russia Today, who interviewed Shahzad Akbar, who is a leading drone victims lawyer. During this interview, Shahzad Akbar claims that out of the over 3,000 estimated deaths from drone attacks in Pakistan, only a handful of high-profile names are ever released. The rest are just ghosts. As a lawyer, he is asking for the names of all these victims from these attacks.
So a human rights lawyer is quoting over 3,000 deaths, and surely getting these names should be quite a simple process.
He states that he will never get these names because the US don't know them and that the CIA have no idea who they are killing. He also states that drone warfare goes directly against a person's right for life, which is a fairly appalling statement. And also goes on to say there is no local mechanism or due process involved. This basically makes the person behind the joystick judge, jury and executioner. The Executive Director of Amnesty International, Stephen W. Hawkins, who is not to be confused with the English physicist and cosmologist, has stated publicly that he urges the Obama administration to ditch its policy of not commenting on drone strikes. He says the US silence is unacceptable and should be investigated as unlawful killings.
So, do they have any support from the locals? I mean, you know, there's allegations that they say publicly they don't support, the governments say publicly that they don't support the strikes, but privately they give the Americans the go-ahead. What do you think about that?
It would appear that way. President Hadi of Yemen states that he officially approves every drone strike in an interview that he made with the New York Times in September 2012. He was quoted in the interview as saying, "Drones pinpoint the target and have zero margin for error if you know the target you're aiming at."
Where does the UK, what do we, I mean, you know, we're usually in the middle of these things, egging the Americans on, if not leading, as, you know, what's the UK's role here?
Well, the UK's interest is through Project Watchkeeper. This is a joint venture between Thales UK and the Israeli defence giant Elbit Systems. They're developing a new unarmed drone which has so far cost nearly £1 billion. The story was covered by The Guardian in December this year and is about the British developing and purchasing 54 surveillance drones. The project has also been linked to the deaths of innocent Palestinians in Gaza.
Oh, Palestinians. Okay, so you said these are unarmed. The British government are saying they're unarmed drones?
Well, according to the MOD spokesperson, Watchkeeper is an unarmed, remotely piloted air system for reconnaissance and intelligence. According to John Hillary, the Executive Director of War on Want, which is a poverty charity working out of Palestine, says the drones have actually been field tested in attacks on Gaza.
So what's the official line on, you know, the various charities? I think there's some pretty surprising charities which are usually pretty pro-US.
Well, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch call drone strikes war crimes.
That's amazing because they're pretty much the same thing as a US State Department most of the time.
The Obama administration say they're not only legal, but most efficient and least bloody means of going after terrorists who pose an immediate danger in remote and lawless places beyond the reach of the government. They also basically say they're better than armed intervention.
Thanks very much, Bob.
Thank you.
Scottish independence, freedom for the Scots or playing into the hands of globalists? After centuries of being ruled and oppressed by the English, are the Scots leaving the Union only to be controlled by a bigger and more anonymous entity, namely the European Union? Our correspondent Roy Hunter looks at why, after centuries of military domination and compulsion really to Scotland to remain in the Union, England is now relaxed about Scottish determination to go its own way. The nation state is under attack and is being portrayed as an anachronism. Who benefits from this narrative, and is it an accurate portrayal of the state of the nation state? Roy.
Hi, Ian. I think that is an accurate portrayal of the way things are going. There's some, very powerful people who want to destroy the nation state. It seems obvious, even with very little research, that it's been one of the main planks of the Bilderberg agenda, really, ever since its inception back in 1954. They've been trying to do down the nation state and expand or get the EU to be more inclusive, really. And who are the Bilderbergs? Well, they're kind of the visible face, really, of our true masters. The bad face of capitalism, really. And so what you can ask the question, why would they want to destroy the nation state? Well, for me, a lot of people I know, it's the capitalists really who are the enemy, and it's not even real capitalism; it's out of control capitalism. It's them. They want to abolish all the trade restrictions in the interest of the profit motive. Trade restrictions, environmental restrictions, labour laws, health and safety. They seem to want to abolish the concept of right and wrong in favour of the concept of profit, really. And how do they achieve this agenda? They do it by being more powerful than any possible regulating authority. And presently, the only entity with anywhere near the authority to regulate the corporations is the nation state. So obviously, they want to get rid of that. It's called divide and rule. It's one of the oldest and most effective tools of control in their army, really. The English, the Scottish, the Welsh and the Northern Irish will be profoundly weaker as a divided nation, as individual nations, than they are collectively as the British. We know that Europe is democratically unaccountable. At least Britain retains the illusion of being democratic, and the people believe that it's democratic, so we still have a chance of getting that back, really. And the danger is the same danger in the United States, really. The secessionist movement are active in all 50 states, and back in 2012, over 1 million US citizens signed declarations that they wanted to secede from the Union. And although the politicians are going, no, that is the corporatist agenda, really, is to divide the Union, really, because if each state is a separate state, then they don't have anywhere near the power they do as a federal movement, really.
Well, that's a pretty controversial, some of that, Roy. I mean, the secessionists in Texas are saying they want to secede for pretty much exactly the same reasons as you think they shouldn't want to secede. They're saying that Washington's the problem, it's totally in the grip of the global corporatists,
sure.
And the best way to deal with Washington is a bit like what happened at the end of the Soviet Union, that each state one by one secedes, and then Washington won't have any tax base, and they'll, so there are other opinions about this in some
sure.
aspects of what you're saying.
Sure, I understand that. But it's not really Washington that's the problem, is it? I mean, the problem with Washington is that they don't have enough power. It's the corporations that are ruling Washington. Surely we both agree on that.
Yes, the corporations do have too much power in Washington,
sure.
But it's I think it's a bit unpredictable what would happen if people seceded. And as for Britain, I mean, the Scots would say that the nation state should be Scotland, and that Scotland's a nation, and Britain was just an artificial imperialist construct
sure.
to justify the British Empire.
Yeah, but it's this divide and rule thing, isn't it? Every time your state gets smaller, every time your representative democracy has fewer and fewer people in it, then the less powerful it becomes, really.
Well, just to be the devil's advocate again, Roy, look at, for instance, Iceland. They stood up quite successfully against the multinationals.
They have done, yeah. They have
and
done,
it is more difficult. Kissinger famously said that he supported the EU because he needs somebody to ring up. He says, when I ring up Europe, who do I ring up?
Yeah.
And so, in a way, I suppose that could be making your point, but in a way it does help to have lots of fragmented states, because they're sort of less easy to control from the top down.
Sure. But if you've got, what you have in the United States at the minute is a federation. So you've got 50 states that they have a federal government, but it's those 50 states, it's those 50 individual states, but all as one in a collective, really. That's why having Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland in the British Union makes them more powerful, because they all control Westminster, and that's what you need. You need the individuals controlling the centre. Whereas if all the states were to secede in the Union, there's no centre to control, and then each one would be weaker individually.
Well, they arguably, but just one final point here is, you can say to a multinational, if you try to evade our taxes, that's fine, but you can't sell any of your products here. And that they wouldn't like that. There are things you can do. You can pass a law to say that there must be a third of the board of a company must be trade unionists. There are things you can do. But anyway, let's just look at the EU.
Well, that's what the TPP is all about, really.
Yes.
Yeah, the TPP is giving corporations
this is the
vast more amounts of power, legal power over the state.
Yeah, this is the Trans-Pacific Trans-Pacific Partnership
This
you're
is
talking
a
about,
yeah,
the
it
trade,
is.
you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
the trade bloc.
Yeah, yeah. Which doesn't affect us directly.
No, but they're doing one with Europe as well, I
Sure,
think,
sure.
so it does in a way.
But that's what's happening now. Is if with that Trans-Pacific Partnership, if a nation state wants to say block a company from selling its products in Britain, say, then that corporation can then take.
It would have to tear up the treaty to do that. But treaties always.
And of course, you can't just tear up a treaty because there'll be.
No, you can actually. Most treaties have the provision that you can. There's an expression you can withdraw from the treaty. You sometimes have to give a year's notice.
Yeah.
But
there'll be penalties.
But I take what you're saying about the EU because they're trying to create an artificial state.
They are.
And of course you can understand, I mean, to be fair and balanced, you know, the Bilderbergers in 1953, they saw the big threat as being another disastrous war, European war. You know, so to them the nation state, you know, 10 years after Hitler, you know, the nation state didn't look as, you know, potentially optimistic as you see it as being, you know. So
Well, you know, I'm not necessarily anti-Europe, but Europe's very unaccountable democratically at the minute.
Yeah, totally.
We've got no say in what's going on in Europe. So I'm not necessarily against, you know, the European Union, but it needs to be democratically accountable.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And I see the way they're taking Europe at the minute, because it has been hijacked again.
Yeah. Well,
like everything else, like the United Nations, these things start off with a lot of good people with good intentions, and then it gets hijacked along the way, and that's how I see the European.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice if somebody had signed off their accounts in the last 10 years, for instance. So, you know, most you know, you wouldn't get a builder in who hadn't had his accounts signed off, but we're all told we have to go with the. But you've been looking at some interesting this regional something or other. Please explain.
The interregional project, or known as Interreg for short, and this has been going on since the early 90s now.
Not particularly reported.
It's not particularly reported, but the information's there if you want to go and search it out. And it has been reported. I remember back in 2005, 2006, it was quite heavily reported. Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, and things. So it did get a little bit of attention, but it seems to have gone a little quieter since then. And so what it is basically trying to create artificial regions, really, that cross national boundaries. I'll read you. This is from the Telegraph in 2006. The Conservative Party fears that the directive, that's the Interreg directive, currently passing through the European Parliament, could be the first step of a Berlin-inspired master plan to create a United States of Europe, divided not into nation states but instead into a series of transnational regions, the templates for which have already been drawn up. Under these changes, those living in Kent, East Sussex would find themselves not inhabitants of Britain, but the Transmarsh region, where their fellow citizens would not be their English-speaking neighbours, but French-speaking population of northern France. It then goes on to look at some of the other regions. There's 5 or 6 different regions. There's the North Sea region, which takes in Eastern England and Scandinavia, Germany and Netherlands. So that would be one.
When you cross the line in southern England, you're going to be moving from a dominantly French-speaking region to a sort of Norwegian. How extraordinary. It certainly helps keep people divided, doesn't it? You couldn't imagine a better way. Instead of talking to your neighbour, you've got to get on the phone to Norway and have a translator.
But of course, there wouldn't be any borders, but it's just groupings of people. And if I can go through them, so there's the Alpine space, and the partner countries there are Germany, France, Italy, Slovenia, Austria, as well as non-EU member states, Switzerland and the Principality of Liechtenstein. So they're one big grouping.
I wonder what Switzerland thinks. They're very proud of their independence. I wonder if they're cooperating with this project.
And then we have the North Sea region, which is Germany, Denmark, Belgium, Netherlands, United Kingdom and Sweden, as well as Norway, non-EU country. There's a Baltic Sea region, which I won't go into. But the Northwest region is Germany, Belgium, France, Ireland, Luxembourg, Netherlands, United Kingdom and Switzerland. But you know, Scotland is being palmed off towards Norway and Iceland, and so that's their partnership really. And I see this. That's why we're quite happy that Scotland go their own way, really, so that this new interregional project can work. So
Right.
they're taken out of the United Kingdom and put into the northwest region along with their Scandinavian friends.
Fantastic. Well, these science fiction ideas, you know, those of us who've been around for a while, we've seen them come to pass.
Well, absolutely, and the funding's all there, you know, and this has been coming down the pipeline for many years now, and it's all there in place. It's all got its funding, and it's all moving ahead without anybody really realising
it. Thanks very much, Roy.
Thank you.
Well, that's the end of this episode of Take Two. We'll be back. Thank you to the People's Voice for airing us, and we'll see you next time.